Yesterday, the Foreign Minister, Winston fresh from a visit to India, I think, went to the bustling metropolis of Palmerston North and gave a State of the Nation speech. It was essentially a stump speech. There were a few protesters outside because, I don't know, the unions had organised them. There's Freiburg High School in Palmerston North. Yeah, it is. Or maybe they were just kids from Freiburg on a lunch break. Or out striking on a Sunday or something. But inside were probably more than 700 party faithful or people who just turned up and wanted to be there. And that's a pretty good turnout for a non-election campaign meeting. And Winston Peters, though I would say, and he's joining us now, he's looking a bit brighter. He looked a bit tired to me, but he had travelled, I don't know, halfway around the world. He gave a speech which was unremarkable. It was a classic Winston Peters speech. It had all the right buttons and it got the crowd going. He's been doing them for a while. But the response has been amazing. He's been called out by all sorts of people, and now he's called by Chris Hipkins the drunk uncle at a wedding. He joins us by video link now. Deputy Prime Minister, nice to have you with us again. How was Palmy?
It was great, actually, and the audience was tremendous. There wasn't party faithful. I mean, if we've got that sort of party faithful members in Palmerston North, then we're going to be the biggest political party in New Zealand.
Yeah, you got to look.
People who came along.
Yeah, I got to say, it's a bit of a trick, though, Palmerston North. I mean, there's not a lot happening in a Palmerston North on a Sunday afternoon. It was a bit of a trick, wasn't it?
Well, I don't quite know where you're taking this question, because basically it's about a thing called democracy and the right for people to hear both sides of the story. I think it's fantastic.
On a serious note, there has been one piece of criticism which I thought about, and you referenced, though you can't have been alive when the Nazis started rising to power because you're only born in 1945, a couple of members, and I'd say reputable members of the Jewish community, have said they do have some concern about the referencing to Nazis in political discourse. Was it your intent to in any way minimise the Holocaust or the experience of that community or the forebears of that community? And would you like to respond to their concerns?
Of course I don't want to minimise any of that, as I do in any circumstance around the world where you get separatism, racism, and people victimised on the basis of ethnic differences. Of course I don't want to do that. But my question to you is, what did the media do when they went to see these people from the Jewish community? Did they put the question to them, which I put? Last year, Waititi, the Maori MP, said that Maori had superior DNA. The moment you say that, you're on your way to the KKK, you're onto elitism, you're onto prejudice, and you're onto awful consequences. Nobody in the mainstream media called him out. I'm calling him out. In the speech yesterday, I'm calling him out. And what happens? The woke mainstream media go rushing off to try and find somebody who's offended. But what did they tell the Jewish community? What prompted me to say that? Because the moment you say that someone's DNA is superior to someone else, you can treat them differently and worse.
I think the political context of your comments yesterday were clear, Mr. Peters, and I think, of course, it has been willfully misinterpreted by my colleagues, I suppose, in the news media. Obviously, the crowd responded to it. We also had a political response from Chris Luxon, who called you a drunk uncle at a wedding and made the claim, quite surprisingly, I'm so glad I ruled him out of coalition before the last election. Your response to Mr. Hipkins?
Oh, Chris Hipkins, yes, not Luxon, Chris Hipkins.
Hipkins, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, he said it.
Oh, yeah.
Well, when he can tell me what a woman is, I'll start taking this guy seriously. That's number one. Number two, I ruled the Labour Party out a year before he even opened his stuttering mouth. Again, the chronology backs me up. And the third thing I'm going to say to him is, I know your type, you probably get drunk on a wine biscuit. So, am I offended? No, I'm not.
All right. And, of course, that gets huge coverage, doesn't it? Any criticism of you becomes a lead story, and the Nazi thing was all over the media yesterday, wasn't
it? Well, it is quite amazing. And I'm talking to these media people saying, why did he make that awful racist statement about being superior DNA? What did you do? like the lambs you are, compliant in the extreme, nothing. Well, I'm calling it out as racist. I'm telling you where that goes to. I've seen international circumstances of awful tragedy and death and inhumanity. Just awful. My view is everybody in this country should be equal, no matter who they are.
Minister, talking of the media, we spoke to Melissa Lee, the Minister of Broadcasting or Minister of Media last week, who suggested to us that legislative change was being worked on in her office regarding the mainstream news media, and I must admit it was not one of the most enlightening interviews I've ever had. Does New Zealand First expect to be consulted on any substantive change to legislation surrounding the regulation, censorship or funding of news media in this country?
Well, most definitely, because these are matters, if they're not covered in the coalition agreement, they are covered by consultation, proper good faith consultation. The second thing, the only political party in the last campaign that had a media policy was New Zealand First, surprisingly, given the way the mainstream media have treated us. But we honestly believe that we need a sound, honest, independent fourth estate. It's critical for every great democracy to have one. But I would expect, and I was overseas when she said, I'm sure, but I would expect us to be properly consulted.
What is your policy? What would you do what are you going to do? What are you going to recommend in the current circumstance?
Well, actually, we laid it out in our pesto commitments at the last election. No one else had a media policy, which is astonishing.
Okay, but what is the policy? And forgive me for not having a mic.
Our policy is to support mainstream media, particularly in the provinces. Otherwise, there's no voice at all.
Okay.
What does that mean? Well, it means we could afford to be proactive in their support as long as we don't demand anything by way of editorial control over what they do.
Okay, so you would be prepared for the state or the taxpayer to fund coverage in provincial areas in particular which might otherwise not be economic?
Yes, I'm prepared. I haven't put the figure on it, but I could see that it would cost a number of millions of dollars. But it needed to be done in that context because, we're trying to build a nation going forward of Kiwis. Now, what does that look like? Well, whatever it looks like will be shaped by, amongst other things, not the politicians, but the media. And so there's a critical role. I used to watch the BBC in the UK. Used to watch ABC in Australia, shaping a country. Now, it got a bit of a hand in Australia. They started to be too political. But it did have an important part to it. And when I was offshore, as a younger person, I used to listen to New Zealand internationally, in the Pacific. And people were checking in from all around the world to hear New Zealand's version of what was going on from a little place in Papatoetoe in South Auckland, the face of New Zealand abroad.